We're slaves to technology, you know. The slave has become the master. The Sonoma Planning Commission to order. And Sheila, would you like to lead us in the pledge? Thank you. At this point in the meeting, we'll accept comments from the public on items that are not on tonight's agenda. We just have 2 items on tonight's agenda. If you have something that is not on tonight's agenda, please come up to the lectern and give your name and address and make your statement, please.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Karen Randall. I live at 854 Hayes Street between Betancourt and West MacArthur. I am right now representing the homeowners of the De Novo property.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Mockingbird Lane.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
This is about Mockingbird.
No, it's not about Mockingbird. It's about a lot across on Hay Street, lot 863, owned by Todd Raffioli. And what has happened here is that it's an empty lot on a residential street, if you know Hay Street, and he's putting storage containers on this lot. And all of us are very concerned about this. We did discuss this with him, and he said he had a right to put these containers there. And we're new, some of us are new to Sonoma. We have no idea, did he need permits for this? Or if you own a lot in Sonoma, can you just put whatever you want on it? Did he need permits? He's claiming it's temporary. I don't know if that's true or not, but in the meantime, we're looking at, storage units on a beautiful lot on a very residential street. My question is that permitted here in Sonoma? Did he really need a permit, a temporary permit, regular permit? Or maybe not. I don't know. I'm here to find out if what he's doing is legal in terms of the policies of Sonoma.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, did you want to try to address this now, or should we?
I will. Yes, you should contact our code enforcement department. Their phone number and email is on our city's website, and they can look into that matter for you.
It's the code
Enforcement.
Enforcement Department.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment on an item not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, then we'll move on to the next order of business, which is a review and acceptance. Oh, we ought to take a roll call, I guess, for our attendance. I'm usually not running the meetings. I'm just the vice chair now, so I'm a little out of practice. Wendy, could you call the roll?
Commissioner Barbos?
Here.
Commissioner McDonald?
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Here.
Commissioner Willers?
Here.
And Vice Chair Barnett.
Here. Thank you. So the next item up is review and acceptance of the agenda. We take the time to determine whether or not we need to shuffle anything on the agenda. at this point in the meeting. We only have 2 items on tonight's agenda. I want to survey the group of you who have come to the meeting to see what you are here for. So if those who are here for the subject of the tents on private property regulations, can you raise your hand to identify yourself? Ah, the lonely man in uniform. And all the others, I'm assuming, are here regarding the de novo project, the Hummingbird project. Okay.
Yeah, through the chair, I think the intent of having that 7.1, the tent item first, is so we could get the city staff person that's here to speak on the item through as quickly as possible.
No, I understand, and my only concern is that we get bogged down in a lengthy discussion about it, and most of the people who are here, who are the citizens of Sonoma as opposed to staff, have taken time out of their lives to come to the meeting. So this would not be my decision. Commission members, do you have an opinion as about switching the agenda items?
I don't see us spending a great deal of time on the tent item, but maybe get a survey from all of you of how critical this is and how difficult it would be for you to deliberate this ordinance.
Well, I'm thinking there might be a fire or some sort of emergency or something that,
I can actually wait. You can go in
oh, okay.
the items and
Oh, well,
If you live in Sonoma, it may end up being interesting.
well, on that basis, I'd like to hear a motion to reverse the agenda items, please.
I make a motion that we reverse the agenda items.
I second.
Roll call?
Commissioner Barbos?
Yes?
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Yes.
Commissioner Willers?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Barnett?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much, and thank you, sir, for your patience. All right, so the next item is the consent calendar, or correspondence, excuse me. Do we have any correspondence that needs to be reported that hasn't been posted to the city's website?
No.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item is the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of items that will be considered and voted on as a single motion. However, tonight we only have one thing on the consent calendar, which is the minutes from the regular Planning Commission meeting of February 10th and the special Planning Commission meeting on April 28th. Are there any recusals on either of those from the? Yes, Mr. Willers?
I need to recuse from the February 10th minutes.
Okay. Other? Okay. Seeing none, I would like to hear a motion.
Move to approve the consent calendar?
Second.
Okay. Roll call vote, sir.
Commissioner Barbos?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Barnett?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're moving into our public hearing section of the meeting, and having switched our 2 agenda items, we're going to move into item 7.2 to discuss, consider, and take possible action to approve a vesting tentative subdivision map for condominium demolition, design review, and landscape applications for de novo homes at the property of 19910 5th Street West. And at this point, we will start with the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Barnett and Planning Commissioners. The project is located on the corner of 5th Street West in West MacArthur. It's a 1.51 acre parcel. It's currently developed with an unoccupied single-family residence and a detached accessory structure. In 2020, Senate Bill 330, otherwise known as the Housing Crisis Act, went into effect, and this limits housing projects to no more than 5 public hearings. The Planning Commission meeting tonight is the second of the 5 public meetings. A preliminary application, as allowed by SB 330, was submitted in April of 2021, and a study session was held in May. The summary of the study session included commissioners asking for a very low income unit, preserving the oak trees, provide a different layout with more open space, incorporate additional street trees around the sidewalk areas, reduce size of garages, consider a duplex or townhouse style configuration, and retain as many trees as possible. In response to the recommendations from the Planning Commission, the project was revised to reconfigure the open space to be a more centrally located. Unit 15 was relocated to the east. 6 of the units were reconfigured to incorporate shared walls. Public open space was increased, along with private open space, and the size of all the units were increased. A special joint tree committee and design review and historic preservation commission meeting was held in March. It counted as the first of the 5 public meetings. Some of the recommendations from that commission meeting was consider the alternate plan proposed by Sonesta villages, including angled homes on the southern boundary. They supported the site plan with a centralized common area located in the middle of the site, and recommended the Planning Commission consider the impact of the project on the Sonesta Village project with regard to view, shed, light, and massing. Ultimately, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission recommended that the Planning Commission approve the project and approve the arborist report with a 1-to-1 tree replacement ratio or greater with 15-gallon trees, and also encourage the Sonesta villas to provide an elevation plan of the alternate plan for Planning Commission consideration. Part of the project before you tonight includes a demolition. So there's an existing unoccupied 960 square foot, 1-story residence and a detached auxiliary building on the property. Could you turn the air on a little bit? A historic resource evaluation was prepared to determine if the building was historically significant. It was determined that the building is not historically significant. So therefore, the project is categorically exempt from CEQA. And if the Planning Commission approves the demolition of the residence, it may also require that the building not be demolished until building permits for the replacement structure have been issued, and that the inside and the outside of the residence be photo documented. If that's the desire of the Planning Commission, that should be added as a condition of approval. In response to the feedback from the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission meeting, the mission style elevation was removed and bicycle parking was provided in the common area. So 2 elevation schemes have been proposed, farmhouse and craftsman, and I'm sure the applicant is going to present a color and material sample later during his presentation. And I'll give you a sneak peek of what he's going to be showing. So this is color scheme number 1, 2, 3. This is the front elevation of the farmhouse style, and this is the front and rear elevation of the craftsman and farmhouse elevations. Lighting is proposed in the form of 3 different light fixtures on the building, and 5 new 15-foot tall light poles are proposed. The proposed lighting is consistent with the lighting standards. Fencing is proposed around the perimeter of the building, and staff would note that the fencing in the front and the street side setbacks is limited to 3.5 feet and 30 inches within intersections within the traffic site safety area, and that the maximum height of a fence, including a retaining wall, shall not exceed a height of 7 feet of solid material. A landscape plan was proposed, listing species of trees, shrubs, and ground covers, and water budget calculations prepared by the applicant are consistent with the water efficient landscape ordinance, and the calculations indicate that the proposed landscaping would utilize about 93% of the allocated annual water budget. An arborist report was prepared. The arborist report stated that 51 trees are recommended for removal, and the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission recommended the Planning Commission approve the arborist report with a 1-to-1 tree replacement ratio. The applicant is requesting a vesting tentative subdivision map to subdivide the lot into a 15-unit condominium development. The lot would support the development of 9 single-family residences and 3 duplex units. And overall, the applicant proposes 4 plans with 3 color schemes. Plan 1 consists of a duplex building, and this duplex building is dedicated for inclusionary housing. It's just over 2,000 square feet. Plan 2 also is a duplex building, and one of the duplex units will be dedicated for inclusionary housing, and it's just under 2,100 square feet. Plan 3 is a 2-story single-family residence at 2,246 square feet, and Plan 4 is a 2-story single-family residence at 2,420 square feet. Access to the development would be provided from 5th Street West via a new 22-foot wide private street, and from West MacArthur Street with a 22-foot wide private street. The units and garage would front the private streets, and garbage service would be via the proposed internal road network. A total of 46 on-site parking spaces are provided for the project, consisting of 30 garage spaces, 4 shared spaces, and 12 uncovered spaces along the driveways. With regard to the development code consistency, the proposed project is consistent with the development code with the exception of the guest parking requirements and the floor area ratio. So the maximum FAR in the medium density zone is 0.45, and the proposed project has a resulting floor area ratio of 0.50. So the proposal does not meet this requirement, but the applicant will be exercising a right under the state density bonus law to utilize a waiver or concession for exceeding the floor area ratio. With regard to parking, the project is required to provide 1.5 spaces for each unit, with 1 space for each unit covered. Guest parking at the rate of 25 total required spaces. So 22 spaces for each unit are required, with 1 space for each unit covered, and 6 parking spaces are required, for a total of 28 spaces. The proposed parking does not comply with the parking standards in terms of the guest parking. And the state density bonus law allows for a reduction of the parking standards consistent with the proposed 46 spaces. So in summary, 28 parking spaces would be required under our
22 or 28? Oh, I see.
28 are required under our parking requirements for condominium. The applicant is proposing 46 parking spaces. So the applicant is proposing more parking spaces than are required, but our parking requirements for condominiums say that 6 guest parking spaces should be provided, and the project is only providing 4. And there's a density bonus law that allows for the reduction of the required parking standards. And I was just trying to say that the reduction is consistent with the proposed 46 parking spaces. So the reduction would allow for the parking as proposed by the applicant. The development code is, the project is consistent with open space standards. There will be over 10,000 square feet of residential common open space and almost 14,000 square feet of residential private area. So the project meets this requirement. The proposed project is consistent with the general plan. With regard to inclusionary housing, I just want to note that because a preliminary application was submitted prior to the adoption of the current affordable housing requirements, which vested the development regulations, a 20% inclusionary requirement applies to the proposed project. The applicant has stated that one low income, one medium income, and one moderate income unit will be provided. The applicant proposes that units 1, 2, and 6 be dedicated for the affordable units. At the study session, the applicant defined medium income as 100% of AMI. The Planning Commission should determine if the 3 units, 1, 2, and 6, are acceptable as the affordable units. And the approved affordable unit numbers will be recorded or included in the conditions of approval. The applicant is proposing to work with the Housing Land Trust of Sonoma County, who will act as a liaison for the city in finding qualified buyers for the 3 inclusionary housing units. So providing the 3 affordable housing units complies with the inclusionary requirements of the general plan. Would note that the project is also identified in the general plan as a housing opportunity site. The concession calculations in the staff report needed to be re-examined, and upon that re-examination, only 1 concession is available. So the project proposes 15 units and 3 are affordable. And the government code says that 1 incentive or concession for projects that include at least 10% of the total units for lower income, or at least 5% for very low households, and this is the part that applies to this project, or at least 10% for persons and families of moderate income in a development in which the units are for sale. And so, since the project proposes 13% of the units as moderate, it is entitled to 1 concession. And that 1 concession would be the exceeding the floor area ratio with regard to the development code. With regard to project issues and traffic, while an assessment of the vehicle miles travels was prepared for the project, a traffic study has not been conducted, and a traffic study will be required prior to the issuance of any grading and site improvement permits, and as a condition of approval has been included requiring a traffic analysis or traffic impact study. Staff has 1 revision to the conditions of approval for condition number 12. And the notation here is that the affordable units are going to be for sale and not for rent. And also, if the Planning Commission wants to include the condition about not allowing the building on the property to be demolished until building permits for the replacement structure have been submitted, and photo documenting the existing structure, that would need to be added to the conditions of approval if that's what the commission wants to do. So there are certain findings in order for this commission to approve this project. There are demolition findings, design review findings, investing tentative map findings. And staff's recommending that the vesting tentative map for the condominium, the demolition, design review, and landscape plan be approved, subject to findings and conditions of approval. And that concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Are there any questions from the commission? Mr. Willers.
Wendy, you mentioned that this was a housing opportunity site, and I know that it was redesignated as RO in the housing element. So I'm wondering why in the staff report and through the application process it's been treated as an RM.
Yes, so the base zoning is RM, and it is also designated as a housing opportunity site.
But it was rezoned to RO as the designation with the new housing element.
And it was, and the medium density residential zoning requirements apply to the property.
Well, the RO is its own designation, and it requires a minimum of 15 units to the acre, and it requires multifamily housing as the submittal. So that's a basic question, and I think it needs to be resolved
Okay.
before we review the application.
Okay, we'll make note of that.
Any other questions before we open this up to the public?
I actually have one more question.
Turn your mic on.
Jeff, this is a question for you, and that is, I need a little bit of clarification on the housing affordability requirements under SB 330. When I read SB 330, under Section 2, I believe it's paragraph 2, subsection H, number 3, it says that the housing for very low or moderate income households means either A, at least 20% of the total units shall be sold or rented to lower income households as defined in the Health and Safety Code, or B, 100% of the units shall be sold or rented to persons and families of moderate income as defined by the same Health and Safety. So I'm wondering why we have an application that only offers one low income unit as their 20% requirement.
They're not offering that. They're offering essentially 2 moderate income units and 1 low income unit.
But my reading of SB 330 is it requires 20% low or 100% moderate.
It doesn't require, it has a variety of entitlements depending on how much affordability you are offering. And if you take a look at section B1, it lays out 7 types of mixes of affordability that trigger its applicability. For example, if 10% of the total dwellings in the structure, or in the development, here we have 15 units, 10% of 15 rounded up is 2. So if a developer offers, in this case, if they just offered 2 moderate income units, they would be entitled to the benefits under 65915. Now that wouldn't comply with the city's own inclusionary zoning ordinance, which requires 20% of moderate or low income housing. My understanding is the developer more or less gets to pick the mix. But I could be wrong about that. Am I right about that? So in this case, the developer picked 2 moderate and 1 low income. That's 3. That's 20% of 15. So the developer has met the city's own inclusionary zoning ordinance, plus it has triggered eligibility under 65915, which is the density bonus laws, because 2 of those are moderate income, and that's at least 10%. And under D of the section I'm looking at here, which is the density bonus laws, if 10% of the total dwelling units are sold to persons and families of moderate income, and it references the Health and Safety Code section that defines moderate income families, that are offered to the public for purchase, then the development is entitled to density bonus entitlements. And those include, if you go to a different page, depending on the depth of affordability offered, you get more or less concessions, incentives, and then beyond that, you get waivers that are unlimited. And waivers are required to be granted if the application of the development standard in question, the one that's being sought to be waived, would preclude the physical development of the project as designed by the developer. I think there needs to be a real understanding of the sea change that has occurred in the planning law in the last 3 to 5 years. It's very it's very harsh in its outcomes. Its goal is to constrict the discretion that planning commissions and city councils have in reviewing residential projects. It makes the planners your gatekeepers, and they have time periods within which to identify inconsistencies between the development proposal and applicable policies, general plan, development standards, design standards, zoning code sections, etc. 30 days. 30 days are given to your planners to review sometimes very complicated, massive development projects to decide all of the inconsistencies. If they miss one, it's presumed to be consistent.
I still feel like in, SB 330, there is a definition of what affordability is.
And I don't know where you're referring to, Commissioner, I'm sorry. I'd like
No,
to find it, but I can't,
so-
I don't have it.
Okay, so I'll give you the text.
Do you have a government code section you refer to?
I do. Highlighted in yellow. And it refers essentially back to the first paragraph of the law.
Yeah, this is a section of the Housing Accountability Act. It's not a section of the density bonus law. So I don't know how it impacts the density bonus laws, because the density bonus laws have their own set of definitions. They do refer to some definitions and provisions in the Housing Accountability Act, but I don't believe it refers to that one, for example. It's very plain from the density bonus law that if you've got, I'm reading here, 10% of the total dwelling units of a housing development are sold to persons and families of moderate income, provided that all units in the development are offered to the public for purchase, you are eligible for density bonus treatment. It's not a lengthy sentence or paragraph or myriad definitions. It's
No,
blank.
and I understand that. I guess my basic question is this application has been processed under SB 330, and yet SB 330 has that definition.
Okay.
And so the affordability in the project doesn't meet that definition as required by the law.
Yeah.
I understand that there's another law.
It doesn't make sense either, because it talks about being sold or rented, for example, and your definition you provided to us today. The density bonus law actually requires the affordable moderate income units to be sold, along with every other unit in the project. That's a criteria that cannot be waived when it comes to applying the density bonus laws. So on its face, I doubt that this applies.
Mr. Barbos?
It's a question for Mr. Walter. Given that 30-day period that you mentioned in which defects in the project need to be pointed out,
Yep.
I assume that if the project did not fit with the actual zoning for the parcel, that is not something that is waived. The objection to the zoning, if indeed this is incorrect, is not something that is precluded even though we're after the 30 days.
I don't know, Mr. Barbos. I would have to research that, but I'm suspecting if we don't catch it, it's deemed okay.
You mean,
have to catch
if the zoning is as Mr. Willers stated a minute ago,
Yeah.
and this project does not meet that zoning, and this was not pointed out in 30 days, you're saying that developers can get projects approved that are inconsistent with the zoning just because the staff didn't pick it up in 30 days?
I'll have to take a look at the cases that interpret this section to see if they go that far.
Okay.
I don't know if they've ever involved that kind of a deviation.
Okay. Well,
Now, I don't know if Mr. Willers is talking about, we frequently mix zoning designations and general plan designations. There are no zoning designations. There are zoning districts. There are designations in the general plan. You describe the ranges of development of capabilities as designations in the general plan. You typically don't describe what's in the zoning code as designations. It happens, but it's not typical. So I'm wondering whether or not Mr. Willers is identifying general plan land use designations rather than zoning.
I think it's coming down to you.
That's the zone code designation or
your mic on?
district. RO. And it implements the housing opportunity designation.
Mr. Chair, this is David. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. While Commissioner Rose was talking about the RO, and I was looking at the zoning map as well, I can clearly see on the face of the zoning map that the coloring code looks like it's a medium density. In the zoning ordinance, we do have a designation, or excuse me, language for the zone RO. So if this property was rezoned to RO, then yes, we've missed it because the zoning map is incorrect, and it's been incorrect for a long time, I would suspect, from the date that this zoning or rezoning of this site took place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
Do we know it's
sorry.
been rezoned?
It was redesignated in the new, in the existing or the current housing element, identified in the current housing element.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can.
And appears when you search this property in the city's GIS as RO.
Go ahead, Mr. Starr.
Yeah, so two clear things. As Council Jeff said, there's a difference between a designation of a general plan versus the zoning. And we know, as a matter of rule, they have to be consistent with one another. Any nomenclature that we ascribe to a map in a housing element is not changing the actual designation on that land use map. So I don't know if Wendy has the ability to show the general plan designation and its corresponding zoning. Those are the two rules of law that we deal with. The housing element does not rezone land unless it's correspondingly changed as a designation on the general plan map. And Jeff can certainly correct me if I'm mistaken. Thank you.
I have a question, if I can ask it. Are you saying, Mr. Starr, that if an entity or a municipality fails to update a map, but the language of the general plan specifies a different designation or zoning than appears on the map, that the default is to the map?
I'll see if I can say it a different way. We have two things that govern land use in California, the general plan and the zoning. And sometimes we have things that go between those two things called specific plans. What I'm saying is that those two things, if you will, land use names, a designation of a general plan or a zoning district, those act independent or one together, of which the zoning is subordinate to the general plan and must be consistent. The general plan will rule. But anything that we've done on a map in a housing element does not de facto change the zoning or change the general plan designation. The map that we're to look at for how this land is developed comes from the land use map that shows the designations in the general plan. The zoning is generally implementing that, consistent with that general plan land use designation.
Is not the housing element, when it's completed and adopted, incorporated as part of the general plan?
Clearly, it is an element of the general plan, but it doesn't, in and of itself, change any land use designations unless there's a corresponding subsequent action to do something as that housing element is directed. So if there was no corresponding legislative act of the city council to change this particular site to RO, then it was never made as RO. And certainly Mr. Walter can provide more clarity on that, perhaps.
So that sounds to me like something that needs a bit more research as to whether an official action was or was not taken.
That would be fair, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walter, do you have anything else to add?
I do.
Can you hand me my jacket?
What I think I'm hearing is that although the housing element may have been modified to reflect that this site was RO. The zoning code, the development code, was not amended to reflect that for this property. Is that correct?
I have to assume that, Mr. Walter, based on the fact that the zoning map that we have shows it as the zoning designation that Wendy has talked about.
This happens on a regular basis where the zoning code lags changes in the general plan. But until the zoning code's amended, the general plan designation does not apply unless the developer under the new housing laws wants it to apply. Because it's often the case, not often the case, it's sometimes the case that the general plan land use designation is more favorable to the developer than the underlying zoning. And that fact, frankly, is the case here. The minimum is 15 under the RO. Minimum is 15 units an acre. That's higher than the zoning designation, which allows up to 11 units per acre? 11. So had the developer come forward under some of the new laws and wanted to put in a multifamily unit project consistent with the RO, we could not use the underlying zoning to deny that, even though the underlying zoning has a maximum that's less than the maximum allowed under the RO designation in the housing element. The streetway only goes one way. Now, there's provisions in their government code that allows for residents to bring litigation to compel the city to modify its zoning code to make it consistent with the general plan and housing element. They're in there because this sort of thing happens on a regular basis. And it's section 65860 of the government code lays out the process whereby when a zoning code lags behind the general plan and residents are unhappy with the lag, they can bring their own litigation. I'll read the final section. In the event that a zoning ordinance becomes inconsistent with the general plan by reason of amendment to the plan or to any element of the plan, the zoning ordinance shall be amended within a reasonable time so that it is consistent with the general plan as amended. And then there's another section that talks about how residents have the power to enforce that provision and compel cities to adopt the appropriate zoning code amendments to make them consistent with the general plan. But where we stand today, apparently, is we have a zoning designation that provides for a less dense project than the housing element. And it's the zoning ordinance that the developer is entitled to invoke at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walter. Are there any other questions for staff at this point? If not, I will open it up to the public and let the applicant come forward to make his presentation first.
Good evening, everybody, honorable members of the commission, staff, residents. Pardon me while I try to get technical things going at the same time. Good evening, everybody. My name is Trent Sanson, here with DeNova Homes. It's good to see you all again since we were here for our workshop about a year ago now when we first presented our project here at 19910 5th Street West. Before going into a little bit of my presentation, which I do apologize, there's a lot of overlap with the good staff report that Wendy prepared with some minor differences throughout. But I just wanted to address some of the conversation that has been had thus far. I do think there might be some, because there are a lot of these new state laws that have come out in recent years, it happens to me all the time, but I do think there's maybe some misunderstanding between the law SB 35, which is one that if a developer and applicant would like to utilize that process does require a minimum of the 10% affordable, which would then allow for a streamlined approach over the counter with city staff and bifurcate and remove the need to go to a public hearing. That is not what we have applied under. We've applied under SB 330, which is the Housing Accountability Act, which at the time that is submitted, it locks in the zoning, the land use, the development codes, and the standards, objective standards that are all in place at the time that application is submitted, which is where we've been operating under the procedure from when our application was submitted. Everything in effect at that time from last year in 2021, we've been operating under. And I think a lot of the slides here in my presentation will help outline a little bit of that as we go. Here's just a bit of a timeline as to how we are where we are today. Back on March 18th, we conducted our first meeting with the city at the project advisory committee level with city staff, doing a round robin review from all various departments with the city to get early feedback. before we submitted our formal SB 330 application on April 28th. From that point, we then prepared and worked with city staff for our, almost actually a year to the day, May 13th, we had our first workshop here to present our project, where after that, we took all the feedback that we heard from the Planning Commission at that time and the residents that we were able to accommodate into our project and submitted our formal follow-up application to supplement the SB 330 on August 9th, to where we were then deemed complete on September 13th, and most recently conducted the joint hearing between the Tree Committee and the Design Review and Historic Preservation Committee, as Wendy outlined everything earlier. A quick aerial photograph of the property showing it in relation to everything around it. Classic infill residential development with housing pretty much on all four sides of it. And naturally an odd geometric shape, as we talked about last year during our workshop, which has made it an interesting property to plan for. Here's a snapshot of the zoning map from the Central West planning area for the zoning district. Admittedly, this is the first time I heard that the housing element was recently updated to designated as RO. But as discussed in the staff report, we've submitted when the property was or is designated RM for medium family residential, which allows for the 7 to 11 units per acre, with a potential of maximum of 17 units under that before utilizing any additional units through the density bonus laws, which we are not seeking to increase the density. We're trying to maintain the 15 units that we have been proposing. Here's a snapshot from the general plan that was available to us at the time we submitted our applications, confirming the medium density residential nature of the property. And then this was already all discussed as it relates to housing opportunity site and the housing element and the affordability levels. At the time when we submitted, the city required in its code before everything was adopted recently for 20% of projects in this district to be half and half of low and moderate, which is where with the odd number of 15 at 20% creating 3 affordable units, we wanted to work with the city to provide a wider range, where instead of 2 moderates and 1 low income, we would do a low, a median, and a moderate to have a wider spread for an 80% AMI, 100% AMI, and 100% or 120% AMI to have a wider spread for those 3 units. This was the housing element that was available to us when we submitted our applications, showing our property in question here today as part of the housing opportunity sites designated, where in the housing element itself for the 1.5 acre property designated it and confirmed its RM and medium density residential with a realistic development potential of 15 units, which we have been working hard with city staff and everybody to make sure we can try to accommodate to achieve the goals of the housing element available at the time we submitted. For our affordable housing projects, we have a very successful and productive working relationship with the Sonoma County Housing Land Trust. Deb Getchis is here on the Zoom call as well to answer any questions for our program that we've done with her and implemented almost perfectly up in Petaluma with the city of Petaluma for various projects, where Dev and the team at the Housing Land Trust work with city staff to not only help identify qualified candidates to purchase the affordable housing units, but also ensure that they are maintained in their affordability in perpetuity so that it doesn't convert to a market rate unit later, and just ensuring that it is part of the affordability for the long haul. Because the condition of approval was originally written to show a rental affordable program, we worked with staff to converse before the meeting to confirm that we would like it. It's always been intended to be for sale units, but if the city would like to see a mix of and or of for sale or rental, my family and I have recently started our own public charity that we call Yellow Roof Foundation, where primarily most of our projects for creating charitable affordable housing projects for the missing middle that are going paycheck to paycheck and are at risk of homelessness. We call the Yellow Roof Foundation to try to create rental affordable housing opportunities. So for some reason there's a desire for a hybrid. We have those capabilities and resources as well to work in conjunction with the Housing Land Trust and city staff to find the qualified applicants for those available housing units. Going back to when we were here in May of last year, just a refresher of time, this was the very first concept plan that we presented during our workshop. If you all recall and can see here, it started out as 15 primarily all single family detached units with a large pass-through street down the middle. After lots of great feedback and deliberation, not to dilute a lot of the conversation that was had, but the 2 primary takeaways that we had after that hearing was to provide a more visible and central common open space that wouldn't feel so tucked away in the corner that maybe future residents of this community might not use, and put it in a more central space, and then also explore, as Wendy mentioned earlier, providing duplex or townhome style units. which we certainly did with the last plan that we submitted and processed and presented to the Joint Tree Committee and Design Review Historic Preservation Committee, which is the plan before you, where we were able to incorporate several duplex-style units, which gave us some more space to create that central common open space to promote future residents to meet and greet and enjoy each other's company in the center of the project, while also an added benefit that we came to realize that this would create as part of it would also prevent future vehicle traffic from potentially using the old roadway configuration as a cut-through, which could create some unsafe traffic conditions. So this type of configuration makes it so nobody can just use it as a cut-through. It would really only be the residents and their guests coming in here. Primary takeaways, again, that we heard at that last joint committee meeting was to soften the improvements along the southern boundary with our neighbors at Sonesta Villas, remove the mission-style elevation altogether and focus on only craftsman and farmhouse, which we have done, and then again, maintaining that centralized open space, but adding a bike rack that could be used by future guests, which we have incorporated into our latest site plan here on the screen before you all this evening. Is the same central common open space, additional trees added with the bike rack as well. We removed the mission-style elevations altogether. One other improvement that we made to our Plan 4 farmhouse-style elevation was that it originally had a gable roof, which, although was meeting and under the height restrictions in the zoning code, we went from a gable roof to a hip roof to help soften the transition of that height to go out and away from the backs of the buildings rather than a straight wall up. We replaced Unit 15 from a Plan 4 to a Plan 3, which allowed us to separate the distance between the buildings by about a foot each to try to widen things up a little bit more. And then we also worked to relocate the improvements along the southern boundary to move north a bit in order to preserve the trees that the Sonesta Villas community has planted on the property line right there to make sure that they could be maintained and saved, to make sure that they couldn't have the aesthetic of those trees that have been there for quite some time, as well as promoting some landscaping around the corner on the southwestern edge to help soften that a little bit as well. Wendy showed some great elevations earlier, but just here's all of them on a one sheet to show each floor plan with the two themes and various color schemes between craftsman and farmhouse. Our architect is on the Zoom call as well if there's any more detailed questions you would like answered, but to supplement anything in the design review package provided to you all this evening. I think there may have been a little bit of confusion on the home square footages, where in the staff report there may have been additions of adding the garage square footage and other unlivable parts of the home added to the square footage. Our actual livable square footages are much smaller, where our first Plan 1 is just below 1,400 square feet, and our largest Plan 4 is just over 1,900 square feet. And throughout this process, there's been a lot of comparisons to our completed Mockingbird Lane project, kitty corner from this property. So felt it would also be helpful to show the wide range of those various plan types that had the large accessory dwelling units as part of that project as well, just to demonstrate and illustrate to everybody that our largest plan here at Hummingbird as proposed is smaller than the middle-sized home at Mockingbird, before you even take into account the 740 square foot accessory units, which made our largest plan there well over 3,000 square feet. So we've worked hard with this density to create a more attainable product and home design for this community, to bring those square footages down and make more attainability by design, in addition to the affordability component that will be provided. One area, as much as I do sincerely appreciate city staff confirming that we are entitled to more waivers through the density bonus law, we do sincerely feel we meet the intent of the code and the parking requirements as written in the code, where our project as designed is providing duplex housing units and single-family housing units, as highlighted on the screen here is with a snapshot from the development code, where duplex housing units are required to provide 1.5 space for each unit. Single-family homes, and I don't know why I didn't write the code, but actually require less, with 1 space per unit on single-family homes. I think there may has been some unintentional overlap between this part of the code for parking requirements for multi-family dwellings or other attached dwellings, which would be for condominiums. Our map is being processed under a condominium map process through the MAP Act. It doesn't mean that we're providing true multifamily 5-plex or bigger condominium buildings, which would be the part of the code that requires that 25% of total required spaces of guest parking spaces for the total required. And if for some reason, even if duplex housing units were considered to be multifamily, 6 duplex units would require 9 primary parking spaces, where we already provide 12, And therefore, from that 25% for guest parking would be 2.25, and we're providing 4, in addition to the surplus parking that we're proposing to be created along the 5th Street West frontage for public street parking as well. So we sincerely feel that based on the black and white nature of duplex housing unit requirements and single-family housing requirements, we already go above and beyond the minimum requirements of what the code requires for parking. And just an illustration to show how with future improvements pending approval, the street frontage would be brought back a bit to create a separated bike lane from the sidewalk and create opportunity for up to 10 potential guest parking spaces along there, consistent with everything else to the south on 5th Street West. After my last Zoom call a month and a half or 2 months ago with the board members of Sonesta Villas, they did express some concerns about this one guest potential public parking space that would be near the entrance to their community from a sightline standpoint. So I've committed to them that we're more than happy to remove that from the get-go and red curb it so that nobody could park there as well. And with that, we also found it very helpful when we were working together to promote and present Mockingbird Lane to have a 3D video prepared. So if it's okay with the commission, I'd like to go and prepare a short, or play the short video we had prepared for Hummingbird. I'm not tech savvy, so the music might not come through very well. Oh wait, there we go. Yes, this is MacArthur. That is the entrance off of MacArthur. And that would be the entrance off of 5th Street West. That is the central common area. So with that, I sincerely thank you all for your thoughtful time and consideration this evening, all the hard work city staff has put into preparing for this evening as well. We would concur wholeheartedly with staff's recommendation for approval, and I'm here to, and more than happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you. Questions from the commission?
Yes, I have a question about the arrangement with the Housing Land Trust that's contemplated. My familiarity with them may be incomplete, but I understood that they will buy houses, hang on to the fee title, give the buyer or the resident, they don't end up paying for the dirt, so to speak, and end up paying less as a result of that, with Housing Land Trust owning fee title to that and preserving its affordability forever. Is that the arrangement you're contemplating here?
For traditional single-family fee simple lots where there is fee title to the land beneath it, yes, that is it. But this with a condo plan, it's more through the deed restriction and then their management in conjunction with city staff. And I believe Dev Getchis with the Housing Land Trust herself is on the Zoom call as well, if you'd like to hear from her directly.
I would, but the point I'm hoping is the case is that the ultimate purchase price paid by somebody who's buying it with the help of the Housing Land Trust will actually be a lower price than the low, moderate, or whatever we're calling the other one, medium, middle, a price that would otherwise be paid if the Housing Land Trust were not involved. In other words, are we going to reduce the price to the buyer by some means that they facilitate?
No, the Housing Land Trust doesn't issue subsidies. They're purely the arm and the mechanism to make sure they're maintaining their affordability. And in quite honestly, they're much better at finding the better qualified candidates and families for those affordable units than we are. So with the now almost 30 homes in the city of Petaluma that we'll be working on together, their team has been fantastic in finding local residents that support the local community with the jobs that they have, and the kids are in the schools to keep them in the schools. But no subsidy is given. It is still, paying the rate based on what's qualified at their income level.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And Deb is here if you'd like to hear from her as well.
Dev, do you have anything to add?
Yes, so the beauty of the, good evening, so Duchess here, Executive Director of Housing Land Trust. The beauty of inclusionary housing is your policy. And what you're doing is saying, Denova Homes is coming in to build market rate homes, and you're asking them to set aside a certain percentage of the homes so that they're affordable to the income levels in those low, medium, and moderate incomes households. And so what we do is work with you as your adjunct staff, figure out what your criteria is to meet your policies and help you achieve your housing goals. So we qualify people, applicants in the community, and work directly with employers to qualify households that will be able to purchase based on their incomes. And Denova, the city, and the land trust all agree ahead of time on what those prices are. So we qualify the buyers, and then we are in touch with them and steward their experience as homeowners, providing ongoing counseling and support pre-purchase while they own the homes, and then manage the resales to make sure that the homes continue to stay affordable and continue to meet the city's housing criteria at no cost to the city.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for the applicant? I have one if no one else does. I want to see what you can tell me about the research that's gone into what I think of as a seasonal tributary or a seasonal creek that's on the property. I had the opportunity, or took the opportunity the other day, to walk the property, and I was struck by the degree of incision downstream at the southern end of the seasonal creek, which indicates to me that at least over time it's received from pretty significant flow. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as incised as it is. What studies, if any, have been undertaken to determine the rate of that seasonal flow, how significant it is, to evaluate the bank stability and the other features that come into play in terms of these riparian corridors?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for asking that question. So just to start off, we've conducted and submitted to city staff, that is, I believe, a part of the staff report package this evening, a biological assessment of the property, including the drainage ditch along there. Long story short, all the findings is that based on it being a recorded drainage ditch with an easement recorded against it, and it being connected to other drainage infrastructure for the city, it is a ditch that is improved on both sides of it along this property boundary. And I believe the city's arborist as well, or on the tree committee as well, after reviewing the arborist report and the biological assessment, concurred it is not in fact a riparian corridor. It's just a ditch that has not been maintained very well for quite some time. So similar to what we did with the public works director and city engineer at the time of building Mockingbird Lane, your current city engineer and public works director have conditioned us to work with city staff to clear out and clean up the ditch with any overgrowth of vegetation that might be in it, similar to the ditch that's on the north side of the parking lot that the hospital retained after we developed Mockingbird Lane to help improve the drainage infrastructure within it. So the ditch itself is not a riparian corridor. It does ultimately drain into Friar Creek. But the unique thing as we've worked on our design is because we did not want to inundate the ditch with any excess runoff, is we've designed our drainage to actually be collected and go to the west and to the north towards 5th Street West in MacArthur, where it'll be collected and conveyed into C3 basins along the property frontage, which will all be landscaped per the preliminary landscape plan proposed, treated and then metered and then discharged into the city's storm drain system. So we're not going to be inundating the ditch any further.
Well, just a little further on that, and I'm going to refer back to Mockingbird. I have long been confused, I'll even say a bit dismayed, at the rock-filled, I don't know what to call them, overflow ditches, water control structures along the street. And I even stopped by the project one day to see if someone could explain to me what the ultimate disposition of those rock-filled holes was going to be. I never did find anybody to talk to about it.
I'm happy to answer that.
I would like some explanation as to both their appearance and their long-term, the long-term plan for them, and also then with reference to this project, whether or not there's anything that's going to be subject to an appearance similar to that.
Yes, sir, 100%, and I totally hear you. So Mockingbird Lane had slightly different drainage conditions than our proposed project here for this property, because if you all recall, the previous state of that vacant land previously owned by the hospital, Hayes Street and 4th Street were unfinished on the sides fronting the property. So with widening the roads, completing the roadway sections, that required us to have to treat the new impervious runoff from that new street within the city's public right-of-way. So those ones that have the cobbles within them in the city right-of-way are the city facilities that the city owns and maintains because it's in the right-of-way. While we were going through that design process and going through plan check, the city engineer at the time actually requested we put those cobbles in there because the city didn't want to have to maintain landscaping within those basins. So that is where that arrived at, that being city facilities, keeping it lower maintenance for the city with those cobbles. And then the rest of the in-tract C3 treatment for the project with where the houses are actually on the front yards that look like landscaping. So that's all within there. And then if we might be able to put my computer back up on the screen, I can assure you all here there's none of those pop-outs because we're not adding any additional right-of-way improvements from the already existing impervious area that is there. So our C3 basins are actually incorporated behind the sidewalk to be maintained by the future homeowners association. That'll be landscaped, owned, and maintained by the homeowners association. So there will not be any of those pop-outs with those cobbles with this project.
Well, thank you. Just to further satisfy my curiosity, the cobble-filled sections that are on 4th Street in front of the Mockingbird project, if I understand you correctly, these are in the city right-of-way, and therefore they were under the disposition of the city engineer as to what they wanted those to be. So is the responsibility of the city that they are filled with rocks?
We were directed to incorporate that into our design to low.
Who was the staff member at the time who directed that?
I think she's since retired, but it was Colleen Ferguson.
I see. And, well, that answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
All right, anybody needing a short break, or should we just move into the public comment? Seeing none, we'll move into the public comment. This is an opportunity for those of you who want to speak on this project to come forward. How many of you plan to have something to say? Can I just get a show of hands? Looks like 3 or 4 of you, or more if you want. I'm not trying to limit it. So if you would please come up to the lectern and give your name and address, make your statement. I'm not going to hold you to 3 minutes, but please be mindful of your time, and if it goes on a little too long, you may hear me break in.
I don't speak very loudly, so I'm going to try and be very close to this thing. So my name is Kim Martin. I'm the president of the board of Sonesta Villas. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. So just to be clear, Sonesta Villas is not opposed to development next door. Actually, the property is a little run down, so we're looking forward to it. But Sonoma needs housing, especially for teachers, firefighters, and other service sector employees who can live in the community. And so the discussion earlier about whether this development meets those criteria, and especially if it benefits from SB 330, I'm very interested in seeing how that gets resolved. Hummingbird Cottages offers one low, no, very low, a medium and a moderate. So it really does very little for Sonoma to address its housing problems. It's also out of character with the neighborhood. So the vast majority of its neighbors, including our 21 units, are single-story homes. There's also mobile homes across the street, and then another single-story development. Vast majority are single-story, and all of Hummingbird Cottages are dense and tall. So in addition to the density and the height issues, and you'll notice that the highest and the largest units are right on our border. So we are disproportionately impacted. So we oppose the lack of parking. It wasn't mentioned in the staff report, but those parking spaces, the guest parking spaces, are compact size. So on the property, there is no parking that a commercial vehicle like a landscaper or plumber or an Amazon can park. So all those parking spaces are driveway, garages. So really, service people are not going to park, or they're going to park in the street. We essentially ask that the municipal code be enforced. So specifically, we were glad to see that a 7-foot solid fence is being maintained. So glad to hear that, because when we met with DeNova, they told us it would be 9 feet. So glad to hear that. We'd also ask that the 8-foot maximum be enforced. So if they put lattice on top of that it not exceed 8 feet. There is going to be a grade change. So DeNova is adding 3 feet to existing grade, again, on our border. So this means if they build a 30-foot home, it's now going to be 33 feet, right behind us. And we ask that that 30 feet be from the existing elevation. So if they're going to raise the grade 3 feet, the house should be 27 feet. And again, even that's out of character. Thank you for mentioning the Fire Creek tributary. And just there should be a 30-foot setback. So really, Unit 15 does not meet the city's own code for protection of our waterways. So those are my points. Thank you for allowing me to make them.
Thank you. Next, come on up.
Hello, my name's Pete Posert. I was a longtime resident here of Sonoma. I moved away, but I spend about half my time back here in Sonoma and always love coming to town, every day. I'd like to speak similar to what Kim mentioned about some of the code challenges that the folks at Sonesta Villa have brought to the forefront. And in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation with DeNova, they met with them and have been rebuffed about quite a few of these issues to the point where they hired their own architect, which is maybe rare for a neighborhood wanting to see something developed, but having the impacts be so somewhat severe such that I think of the 21 homes in Sonoma Villa, I think in the last 6 weeks, 3 people have fled, where it's maybe 3 a year or 2 a year, to the point where the folks at Sonesta Villa have hired a lawyer, I'm sure you saw their letter, to think about those codes. And as Kim said, the development is a good thing. We need more housing, but the impacts are kind of severe when you're looking at a 33-foot wall on your driveway that's not there now, that's open space. So some of the concerns are pretty direct and I think kind of clear. Oh, I better put my glasses back on. Where did I put them? Here we go. I wrote them down. I think what might have been missed in the presentations of both the staff and DeNova was the open space requirements for the low-income, moderate-income housing. There are restrictions for that, and I think they were included in the porch area or not at all is considered open space for low-income housing. And I don't think that meets the codes as written about by our lawyer's letter to y'all. We don't want to get into the slippery slope of starting to chip away at affordable housing requirements. I think those rules should be pretty firm. So I hope you take a good look at that. I'm still really fuzzy about the parking restrictions and whether it's 4 or 6. And how some of the for sale homes got labeled as condominiums. I suppose if you all know the codes better than I, surely that must be what it is. But the housing looked like it's overflowing into both MacArthur and 5th Street, which are bike lanes. And suddenly you're pushing people into a corner in an intersection that the city has already labeled as somewhat hazardous, the corner of MacArthur and 5th, with not very much space. Either the access ports to DeNova's housing or the corner itself is already somewhat problematic, and you're pushing more parking and lack of eyesight into a stop sign that wasn't shown in the video. There was a car just whizzing through a stop sign on their own video. I hope you take a good look at that, because that's a bike lane right there. I'm also concerned, like Kim said, about the height restrictions. They have to add 3 feet because of the water flow from the creek, or the partial creek, or whatever they're called. You know, it's a temporary creek to meet the water runoff restrictions, or whatever that is, floodplain, temporary floodplain, whatever it is. If they have to add 3 feet to the footing of the house to build it up, I hope someone takes a look at what the real height restrictions are, whether it's from the built-up land spot or the existing plane of dirt, because it would exceed the height restrictions, and that's the heart of the matter, I think, for DeNova, from DeNova to Sonesta Villa. In the code that I saw that were outlined by the lawyer, it said desired future in the housing element, I believe. The desired future is the general objective for this area as expressed in SMC 1926-020 is to ensure that new infill developments respect their immediate context. And that strikes to the heart of the architect that these folks hired to soften the impact of the back fence of DeNova's proposal to angled so that it respects to some degree the living corridor of the folks in Sonesta Villa along that area, as opposed to just a wall, whether it's 7 feet or 9 feet or 10 feet. The change that Sonesta Villa requested was simply just angle it a little bit so that there was a little softer blow, which was resoundingly rebuked. Last but not least, that was it. Desired future. It's what desired future we want for our community.
Thank you, sir.
Collectively, yeah.
Next.
Marcia Maycomber, resident at Sonesta Villas. There's still debris at the intersection of West MacArthur and Fifth West from an accident there this weekend, and it's still all jammed up on that corner. So we do get a lot of problems there. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Further, anyone else?
Hi, I'm Diane Lumiere, 113 Merida Drive in Sonoma. I just ended a 40-year career as a project manager and color consultant, design consultant, and space planner for hundreds of homes in Sacramento, the Peninsula, and San Francisco. So I'm not a very good public speaker, so I'm going to read a little bit of this. I sent you an email earlier this week, and also I amended that email when I read through all of the, at least 60 pages of the report from staff today. And so, okay. Well, let me read this a little bit and then I'll calm down probably. I've since reviewed the adjustments to the proposed development as suggested by the design review committee I attended. I was very pleased that the developer followed their recommendations to preserve the trees on the southern border, modify the roof lines to hip roofs there, add more trees to meet the 1-to-1 ratio, and most importantly, omit the mission style elevation. That was my biggest complaint with Mockingbird, their first development in town, is that this mishmash of styles in with 7 to 8 feet between the homes was just still an eyesore. And when I attended the design review meeting March 1st, the commissioner, after we made our public comment, said, you know, with these kind of projects, you know, people complain and then they're built and then everybody calms down and it isn't as bad as they think it was. And that offended hundreds of people, that comment, because we are living with Mockingbird Lane right now. And it's nothing that we ever envisioned for Sonoma, the town of Sonoma. So that said, and it also looks like the fire department has signed off on the cul-de-sac access issue as well. I believe that's true, but I'd like some feedback on that. If the fire department can actually access those homes in a cul-de-sac kind of formation off those two busy streets. This all seems to bring the development into an affordable, acceptable addition to the neighborhood, given the need for more affordable housing. However, I do wish the entire project was built to be more affordable by reducing the size of the homes on the southern border and connecting them as they have in the other part of the subdivision, as duplexes. Either that or introduce a few single-story homes into the mix with carports and one-car garages. Lastly, the deep color choices on the two Craftsman elevations are depressing. I'm a color consultant. I've colored probably over thousands of homes. And there's reasons I say this. While I understand the color trend on the farmhouse board and batten elevations are fun and very trendy right now and acceptable, the Craftsman style two-story homes look like Darth Vader kind of elevations. They're not welcoming and they're looming in these two-story designs. There's a real issue with those as well in terms of energy. You're all cutting down, I mean, I've given up on the eucalyptus trees. I know that that's a lost cause. However, those are the gateway to our town. They're absolutely loved by everybody in the neighborhood, and I know they're going. With that, though, goes an incredible amount of shade from that western elevation that is cast onto that whole property. And if you add 30-foot plus high two-story homes in dark colors on that side of the road with no shade, you're going to have a huge heat impact on that subdivision with those dark roofs and dark colors. Now, on his video, he showed very light primary colors on a couple of those buildings. I saw nothing on those elevation plans that he presented tonight on the general plan. And by the way, color is back. So we're pretty sick and tired of gray and deeper gray and cream and black and deeper gray. So I really ask you to have them go back to the drawing board on that. And there's a lot of colors in the universe, and we should utilize them here in Sonoma because that is what we're famous for, by the way. Let's see. Is there anything else? Yes. Part of the issue, the huge issue that the residents of Sonoma have been asking developers and everybody in town and city council and you all is that we would like to have smaller, affordable homes built in this town, period. That's it. And while they attempt, and I appreciate your attempt, honestly, to make smaller homes, and they are, they're all still two-story. And we know from the past that these homes are going to be bought immediately, possibly by second home buyers from the city, and they are not going to be lived in, except on the weekends. So, is there any way that this town, with the general plan, can specify these homes as primary residences? I know you can with the land trust, because obviously they're working for 3 of these 15 homes to do that. But I think it's about time that cities stand up and say, we need to make sure that their primary residences being built if we're going to allow development to happen in this town. So with that, thank you very much for your time and all that you do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone further?
Hi, my name's Mandy Massarelli, and I live in the Sonesta Villas. Our condominium complex is 800 and 1,200 square foot units. This is the type of units that regular people can afford to live in, the people who work in Sonoma, which all of us are either working or retired in Sonoma. And this is the type of housing that we need, 800 to 1,200 square feet. With their very smallest unit being 1,300 square feet, I don't even know how a person can afford that. I don't know where they're going to find that person or what job they're going to have that they can afford those 3 affordable houses. So I just think the size of these units is too big. All of them are too big.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the commission for deliberation and decisions. Who would like to start?
I just want to get clarification on the comment that was brought up about raising the soil level 3 feet and then the housing height above that. Wendy, can you shine a little bit more light on that?
Right, so I did look at the site plan and that the elevations aren't, they vary. So they've got to level the site, and it is going to be a difference between 1 and 3 feet. And the development code measures the height of buildings from finished grade.
Do we have any restrictions on how much can be added to the existing soil? Like, obviously we can't have them putting in 20 feet. So do we have any kind of rules or guidelines or?
Not that I know of.
I've got a further question for you on that. When the grade on a parcel is increased and it's adjacent to clearly a drainage area, whether we call it a seasonal creek or not, does consideration is consideration given to the effect on the drainage flow to a pre-existing channel of that increase in grade, which is clearly going to have an impact on the runoff calculations?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how to answer your question, but I do recall the applicant saying that any drainage from the site is going to be diverted to 5th Street West and West MacArthur in this existing storm drain. It's not going to run into the drainage ditch.
Okay, thank you. Further from the commission?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions for staff, and maybe the developer could answer these for me. One has to do with the proposal by the homeowners association to vary the and stagger the units in a different orientation. And I just wanted to know, the way it's oriented now, it would maximize the amount of solar exposure for if there were to be solar panels on the buildings. And so I wanted to know if the developer, had any sort of issues if the orientation of the buildings were changed, and if that would affect at all any sort of solar program or design that you would present for the homes. And then the second question, which also has to do related to the development impacts to the subdivision next door, there is a landscape strip along their private drive and between the fence and that drive, which appears to me it could potentially be, I don't know how wide it is, but it shows that you're proposing trees along that. I would imagine that's for screening, but has there been any discussion about creating a better screening program between this development and Sonoma Vista to soften the development?
So through the chair, if you're asking the applicant a question, the chair would need to reopen the public hearing if he wanted to. I would note that the building department did talk to me about landscaping the backyards of the properties that are adjacent to the south, where Sonesta Villas is, and he was concerned that any trees planted in that area could prohibit any solar panels from achieving their maximum capacity.
And trees or versus shrubbery or something like that, I just wanted to understand if there was a way to be able to soften the transition between the new development and that road with a combination of trees, which obviously you wouldn't plant redwood trees, but you could plant smaller trees that could soften that. But anyway, those are questions I had. And then I also, we were talking a little bit about grade. It seems to me that the grade for the development 5th Street and MacArthur is the highest point, and the lowest point is actually where Sonoma Vista is. So I guess my understanding is that the grade is going to be terraced in a sense, so it's going to be raised up to possibly 3 feet along that private drive, which is on the other property. So I just was trying to get a sense of the severity of that grade change.
Let me see if there's other questions or comments from the commission, and then I will open up the public hearing again and give the applicant an opportunity to answer some of these questions. Others?
Yeah, I'll go forward. I don't really have any questions. I'm going to essentially make my comments. So I'm going to start by the fact that our school system is having a declining enrollment. That declining enrollment is also now affecting the teachers and the principals of those schools, where they're leaving our community. And the primary condition that they're facing for leaving our community is a lack of affordability in the housing. A majority of the principals that have left the school district have left because they cannot live here, and they live in other communities, and they found closer work. recently, on a recently approved subdivision on MacArthur, not Mockingbird, a 1,300 square foot single family home on MacArthur Street facing it sold for $1.275 million. And is now on the rental market for $4,300 a month. And that is the perfect example of what happens when you take the RM zone and you convert it into a single family zone. In our general plan, the RM zone, the medium density residential zone in the designation language says, this designation is intended to provide opportunities for multifamily housing. In the zoning code, under the medium density residential district, the medium density zoning district is applied to areas appropriate for medium density multifamily residential development. And my understanding of multifamily residential development is that it's made up of multifamily dwellings. In our definitions in our development code, multifamily dwellings are defined as buildings or a portion of a building used and or designed as a residence for 3 or more families living independently of each other. So in essence, what it says is that multifamily dwellings, which in my opinion are multifamily residences and multifamily housing projects, are intended to be triplexes at least. And in Sonesta Villa, you can see the demonstration of that zoning. That's an RM zone piece of land. Those units were built at a time when multifamily housing was still built, and they represent a smaller, more affordable form of housing as multifamily residential. I honestly do not think that this project actually complies with our zoning code because of that, and I have for the last 30 years argued this point in front of the Planning Commission while I was on the Planning Commission in a prior existence. And I honestly believe we cannot give up the remaining multifamily zoned land to single family residences, no matter how they're configured, whether it be in condominiums to basically get around the minimum lot size that you would have to do for a fee titled lot, or you know, in any form other than multifamily residential. What happens with multifamily housing is that when you combine units, you basically make the house less desirable, not from a living standpoint, but from a market standpoint. And what that does is it maintains a lower value in the marketplace. The current duplex arranged and triplex arranged units in our community sell in a range of about $725,000 to about $800,000 to $900,000. Well, that is a lot of money to many people. It's not $1.2 million or $1.4 million or $1.6 million. And it offers an opportunity to a much larger group of people. It also, in my opinion, would lead to a reduction of the impact of these properties on the adjacent property, because it would compact the footprints of these buildings. And because they would have a lower value, they would probably not be speculated to a higher square footage, but actually be brought down to a lower square footage, more befitting a multifamily residential project. And so those are my comments at this point. I'm happy to listen to the rest of the commission.
Please, you can always just raise your hand silently if you're in agreement with someone. Okay, further? Commissioners?
Are we into comments?
Yes, we're into comments.
This is a comment and a question to anyone who can answer it. I tend to agree with what Mr. Willard said. I recognize de novo is wanting to maximize the profit that it's making from its property. I don't think that's what the city needs, is another project like the one proposed. But I'm feeling a bit discouraged by SB 330, by this place we find ourselves now, 100 days, past, or, way past the 30 days. And so my question is, realistically, what are our options here? I'll just leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, please.
Trent, thank you for taking our feedback into consideration and reducing the size of the properties. And I would agree with the others that I think it's not small enough yet. I think the demand we have in the market is definitely for affordability. I like the suggestion of being able to restrict it to a primary residence use, but that's not going to work. Legally, we can't do that. But what we can do is discourage them from being well suited to vacation second homes and encouraging more housing for the people that live here. Teachers, certainly, we want to encourage, and we love our firefighters, but they like bigger properties with shops on them and things. So I definitely still believe that the individual designs are just too large. I think they need to be scaled back quite a bit. I like the idea of much smaller units, so I'm still leaning in that direction. Thank you.
Anyone else? Everyone had a chance? Okay, well, I will add my 2 cents. I want to clarify, and this is something when I reopen the public hearing, Trent, you can speak to. I feel that there are some not particularly large stature oaks that are adjacent to that channel that appear to me to be healthy. There may be 20, 25 feet tall, that I would like to see incorporated into the project. If they're not currently, I haven't gone through all the details of the planting plan, but I didn't see them on the schematics. And I think even if they required a modest bulb out of the curb to accommodate the drip line, I think that they're worth saving. The rest of the trees on the site are in terrible repair and terrible health. Black locust and black walnut, and there's really very little there worth saving. I do mourn the loss of those magnificent eucalyptus, which are probably 50, 60 years old. I appreciate age in trees, but they are messy, and but they provide roosting and nesting areas for the birds, and I will be sorry to see them go. I want to say that one of the findings we're being asked to make tonight is compliance with the general plan and the zoning ordinance. And if I understand our city attorney, I don't even know why it's on why we have to make that finding, because it sounds to me like this application has already been deemed compliant by city staff, and the time limit has run out for any other decision regarding compliance to be made. Now, that isn't to say that this commission couldn't decide for itself that it couldn't make that finding and say that it's not compliant. That's our option, and I would expect that will be challenged and appealed, and all things being equal, could even go to court if the city decided to pursue that angle. But I'm sorry to see that the medium density residential designation, which was intended to create multi-unit developments, has somehow morphed into something else. I don't know how that's deemed compliant. We seem to have defaulted into that. I would like to recommend that before city staff deems a project compliant, that it be reviewed by legal counsel, that we have a land use attorney review our codes in detail to make sure that we in fact do find something in compliance, and it's going to have to be done quickly if we only have 30 days. But I don't think at this point, because of the impact of state laws that are putting time pressure on the city and the risk of missing something, that we're doing anything other than undermining our own objectives. Our objective is for the medium density residential zoning designation to produce something specific. It's what we have in the general plan. It's what we intended to have happen. When it doesn't happen, and even if it doesn't happen inadvertently, we've shot ourselves in the foot. And I think it is really, in this day and age, with a diminishing number of options, the increasing cost of housing, and the deep need this community has for more affordable units, we can't afford to let that happen. We shouldn't have let it happen in this case, in my opinion, and we certainly can't afford to let it happen in the future. We need a higher level of scrutiny of every major project that comes forward to determine if it is, in fact, satisfying the goals and aspirations of the general plan and our zoning ordinance. We can't afford to miss it. Not if the rules are as Mr. Walters says they are, which we've got 30 days to figure it out, and then the game's over. So while we're being asked to make a finding about compliance, that's really moot. The decision's been made from a legal standpoint, if I understand it. We don't have a say in it tonight. And question is whether an item like compliance ought to even be part of the findings anymore, if it's something that isn't under our purview, which apparently it's not. And this is a byproduct of the state law, and we need to adapt ourselves to the realities of how things are changed, or we're just going to see this happen over and over again. Okay, Mr. Barbos?
This is just a thought, and since you're going to reopen it up and Trent's going to come back up, I just want to double back for a second to what Sheila and Bill have already said. And what we learned earlier is that actually de novo could come in under the other zoning designation and put more units on this property. And would de novo be willing to go back to the drawing board, put more units, smaller, affordable by design on this property? Because you could do it. Apparently the ball's in your court and not ours, because we haven't actually amended our zoning code to reflect the general plan amendment, but you can have it either way. So I'm hoping that the wheels are turning and you're thinking, how many more units could I get could I make this deal work with 1,300 square foot houses, only a few more of them.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'm going to reopen the public hearing so that Trent can come up and respond and answer some of these questions. Under that process, after he's finished, if someone else would also like to come up, you will have an opportunity to do that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Really appreciate everyone's feedback and deliberation here. And I tried to take the best notes I could, so if I missed something, please feel free to chime in and let me know if I didn't answer it. We did extensively review the proposal and the concept plan that the Homeowners Association at Sonesta Villas did prepare. I commend them for the effort and looking at it. It was really thoughtful. We did go through it. I did meet with them via Zoom as a board with myself to go through it all. But unfortunately, when we were looking at the plan, it is a plan that did not meet the objective design standards that we are required in the zoning district. We would have violated setbacks. We would have violated necessary parking, vehicle access, ingress, egress points with the homes. And quite frankly, when we looked at it closer with our design team, we felt that it would actually created more of a wall effect, because when you angle the units, they'd be staggered with each other so that no more natural light can come through with how we have our homes in the current configuration being straight as they are. So we did look at it, tried to incorporate little things we could here or there. For example, replacing unit 15 with a plan 3 to try to spread things out and get more of an angle on the end. We did work on that. I have no concerns about the ability to provide solar as it's currently laid out. We're going to provide solar as standard with all these future homes anyways, and we'll work with our solar design team and our architect to make sure they're optimally located in the correct locations on the future roof lines of the homes. I totally am hearing what everybody's saying about the need for smaller homes. I feel like we've sincerely demonstrated our desire to create something smaller than what we've previously built. But to go back to objective design standards, if the city wants to update its code for future projects to put a maximum square footage allocation on there, I encourage you to do it. But that's currently not in the code to set maximum home sizes for these projects. We have setbacks, an envelope to build in for development standards that we have demonstrated we comply with, as staff concurred with the recommendation, short of utilizing the density bonus areas for concessions as it relates to FAR. With all of that said, I think this comment is kind of blanket to a lot of the things that I heard, and just this is going back to how many of these meetings I've come here with you all, and I respect everybody here immensely. Former Commissioner Cribbs had what I think was a perfect saying when we were coming here through with Mockingbird Lane, and I just wanted to reiterate it here even though he's no longer part of the commission. Perfect is in the eye of the beholder. Therefore, everyone has a different opinion on what is perfect and what should be perfect. Therefore, because nobody is going to agree on what is perfect, perfect is the enemy of good. I sincerely feel we have come up with a good project. We're a quality builder. We're a family-owned and operated builder. We've been here in Sonoma. We are here now. We plan to continue working with city staff and this commission and council for whatever type of projects we would like to pursue in the future. Not to have more pitchforks come out at me, but we are working on an apartment project on Highway 12 right now that we're hoping will produce 50 apartment-style units that will all be between the 600 and 900 square foot range on a rental basis, where our application is going to be submitted after the current housing ordinance was in place for a 25% requirement requiring the lower income levels. So we are working on other projects in town that are going to create more diversified housing options in town, where Hummingbird is a smaller for sale project, although maybe not small enough in some people's opinions, but we're also working on rental, much more affordable types of projects elsewhere in town on the north side off of Highway 12. So I'm a firm believer that there needs to be diversity. You need to have a breadth of types of housing, rental, for sale, medium, large, small, everything in between. And I think we've demonstrated that with, although again, I could be having more pitchforks come out because other people don't like all the projects, but Oliva, when we built Mockingbird, we built Oliva at the same time, which is our apartment project for 30 units that had another affordable component in it as well. So we're delivering many different types of housing for the Sonoma population and the city at large. So I really appreciate everything that we've heard here today for this project. I really sincerely feel that our primary goal is to create the 15 units that we have submitted as objectively outlined in the housing element and the codes and the general plan when we submitted. So respectfully, am stating that I do not want to add more units here to add more potential impacts and more intensity on this property. I sincerely feel from my perspective, even though I know I'm biased as the applicant, that it's a good project and that I'll be very proud of, and I would love to bring my kids to when they're older, because I'd like them to follow my footsteps in this industry as well. So I'm happy to answer any additional comments that come up, but that's my comment right now.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
The question about the private driveway adjoining the development and the possibility of softening the development with a landscape proposal that could be done by the developer.
Yes. May I try to hook up my computer again?
Sure.
I can pull up the landscape.
Yeah.
Don't freeze up on me. Did I get it? There we go. All right. So let me actually just go ahead and pull up my landscape plan for everybody instead of the PowerPoint slide. There we go. Come on, please. There we go. Okay, so Commissioner McDonald, was this the corner that we were referring to here?
Yeah, I was actually referring to the brown strip that goes along Unit 11 through 15. I see there's some existing trees there, but I was just curious if there was the ability to create a better landscaping screen.
So to answer your question, our previous plan, as by going through the succession of the site plans to where we are today, because those trees were on the property line, our original plans had them slated for removal, with that short retaining wall being along the edge and the fence shortly behind it, above it, going beyond, which definitely created much more of that wall effect. After meeting with Sonesta, the board members of Sonesta and participating in the previous joint tree committee design review hearing, definitely heard from everybody that it was very prudent for us to make sure that we tried to save those existing trees since they were planted by Sonesta for their window into their community to make sure they were maintained. So the intent is to bring the improvements back to the north to make sure that we can save them for them, and that because it's kind of part of their community and their trees, this would free them up to do whatever sorts of improvements they wanted to do, whether it was mulch or other ground cover in between their trees. But then along the border right here, we did not propose any additional trees on the back right here because it was a little bit tight. It's about 3 or 4 feet. But we did have the trees along the streetscape for 5th Street West with a landscape palette coming around that would dead end before the first tree, that our future landscape maintenance for the future HOA could easily come around and wrap around without going through their driveway to prune and maintain and whatnot, to help soften that entry and transition to their trees.
So my understanding is then the fence has been set back away from your property line to accommodate these trees.
Yes.
So in a sense, you're granting them use of property that you would own otherwise for to keep the trees.
Simply put, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public want to make one further comment? Okay. Please try to make it brief.
It's brief. Hi again, Diane Lemire at, this is a model that I hear over and over again as a project manager and as a space planner in many, many different communities. They build apartments that people can rent and afford, and those people can build no equity. It's just rentals. So the same developers build apartments which they own and let people rent, instead of building smaller homes that people can build equity in a different kind of subdivision. Now, I'm wondering, you have the power, I believe, here to change the structure of this property as long as it meets his zoning requirement, right? He doesn't have to build all 2-story homes. He's allowed to build 15 to 17 homes, but he's not, it's not a requirement that they all be 2-story, right? I mean, I'm asking this.
Well, we'll respond after you're done.
Okay, so what we're trying to do as a town is to change the model. Don't just make people live in rental units that live here because they can't afford a home. Let people buy smaller homes that can build equity in and their families can inherit, and move that forward. So this remains a somewhat middle-class town, not just a town of multi-million-dollar homes and rental units. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? One last comment?
Yeah, I second that. I do want to point out that although Trent met with us twice, really the attitude is always the same. The same as we just got, right? Can you do something to accommodate our concerns? And basically what we get is an explanation of no. The answer is no. We can't do anything to accommodate, even the 15 units, keeping them on the lots as they are, but making them smaller, making them shorter, making them one story. None of that can be accommodated, in DeNova's mind. I do want to point out that the plan that we offered used a smaller home. So when Prince says that it wouldn't accommodate, it's because he's taking his largest home and trying to angle them. So just keep that in mind, that we offered a plan which reduced, again, the size of the homes, and it was rejected. Okay. I'm sure I had something else, but I've forgotten it. But thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you. Was there anyone else?
I appreciate all the comments, especially the ones about solar power, as I put up solar power in homes every couple of months as an energy worker. It reminded me of something I thought a few months ago, in that if it was possible to just inquire about lowering the roof line of these two-story homes, which would mitigate the impact on Sonesta Village, and still allow for solar. You don't have to have a big sloped roof, but just lowering that height, because they're raising the ground up 3 feet, lowering the slope of that roof might achieve the same somewhat visual impact mitigation. And I was wondering if that might be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Commission, shall we try to wrap this up? And, or do you want to take a bathroom break?
Mr. Chair, if I can, this is David speaking. I'd like to recommend that you take a brief pause. I'd like to have the opportunity to speak to Mr. Walter and Wendy, so that we can provide you with some alternative direction tonight. Alternatives for direction tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Starr. So we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you. bring the meeting back to order. And did you want to make any comment, Mr. Walter, post your deliberation?
Well, I was chatting with David and Wendy, and the commission's asked for some alternative approaches here. We're not sure exactly where you're headed with this project. It's my understanding that the commission's decision when it comes to the tentative map, it's an advisory decision to the council. This is going to the council no matter what. And if that is the case, and the commission is not supportive of this project, as you know, the documents in the package, the staff package, are all aimed at approving this project. If the commission's not supportive of approving the project, then our recommendation would be to move to deny it, expressing your individual reasons for denying the project, and that would be a recommendation to council, and it would go to the council for the next hearing or hearings. We would not ask you to direct us to prepare resolutions supporting a denial. The findings are complicated. We could spend 2 or 3 days trying to determine how to go about crafting those findings. I don't think it would be worth the effort. And as I'm informed and told, this is an advisory decision on your part anyhow. It's going to the council anyhow. So you would recommend denial. You'd each express your reasons why you wanted to deny the project, and that would be one alternative. The other alternative would be that if you're supportive of the project, that you direct staff to come back with revised conditions of approval and a resolution that reflects some of the comments and other things that we've discussed this evening. I would like to be able to fine tune and revise some of the findings and conditions of approval just to make sure that they're clear and consistent with practice in the law. So that would be a second option, to direct staff to revise the resolution in the packet and the findings and conditions of approval and bring that back to the commission for final approval at a forthcoming meeting.
So that would constitute a continuance.
It would, and it would be a third meeting, which would then give the council 2 meetings to take care of this this project.
Okay. And did you have a third?
Well, I know there's some of you who want to increase the density. My understanding is, however, that there is no requirement that the density be increased, except for the housing elements land use designation, which, in my view, probably doesn't apply here. I do want to take some time to research that issue, because I think Commissioner Barbosa is particularly troubled by that, and it's a significant deviation. I want to get my arms around the law on that in a much better and clearer and a more confident way. The third option would be that you would recommend approval conditioned upon the units being increased to X number of units and no greater than X number of square feet. The difficulty with that is that we don't have standards in place that would support that. And it really, it goes to the question of that some of the speakers have raised was, well, can't you just demand and reduce all the second stories to 1 story? No, because the city does not have any objective development standards that compel a single-story project on this site. So it's up to the developer to decide what it wishes to do, unless there are countervailing objective standards, and those have not been adopted. So your hands are tied. Your hands are tied. I think my last option doesn't make any sense, frankly.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like an option.
No, it would be a waste of time. So I think the options in front of you are, if you don't like the project, recommend denial. We'll take it to the council. Or if you're okay with the project, believe that your hands are tied and you must approve it in some fashion, that you direct staff to come back with the appropriate or revised resolution and conditions of approval.
Thank you. Does everyone understand this?
Okay. I do, but I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Barbosa.
Let's say we were going with the revise it, change the conditions of approval, and we went with something. It sounds like, though, because of the lack of objective standards, for example, we couldn't say, and remove the second stories, nor could we say, and reduce the size of the houses to 1,500 square foot to 1,000 square feet. We couldn't do that either because we don't have an objective standard. So our choices are extremely limited as to what we could even do to make this project approach what some of us anyway would like to see. So I don't see that option as being helpful.
No, I agree. I backed away from it. As I was talking, I was thinking, this doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
A question I have, Mr. Walter, is, let's see how I can best ask this. If we approved the project, it still has to go to the council because all we're doing is making a recommendation. Am I correct?
That is my understanding. Now, David Storr and Wendy have told me that that's how it works here in Sonoma.
No, Trent says no. Bill says no.
And Bill says no. Well, what would you like to give some perspective on that, Mr. Willers?
I believe what we're doing by approving the project, if we approve the project, is vesting the tentative map. The city council essentially adopts the final map as an action of approval of the project finally. In other words, when we approve the project, the tentative map is vested, which gives the developer the right to develop.
Okay, and
And the final map is just an action.
Okay, and if we denied it, then and it still goes to the city council, are they then just making a decision about the map? What are they making a decision of? They're making a decision about the entire project.
Yes.
It is.
Because it'll go on appeal, probably.
Yeah.
It's common that the Planning Commission has the power to approve a map, a tentative map, be it vested or otherwise, subject to appeal to the council. If there's no appeal, then your decision stands, and that's why it's important commonly to have the resolution and conditions of approval as good as you can make them, because they oftentimes end up being the final decision of the city, because there's no appeal. I'm suspecting there's going to be an appeal here, whichever way you might decide. So if that really is the proper procedure, that you're not making an advisory decision, and if you really are intending to deny this project, then we need to come up with some kind of resolution and findings to support a denial. If in fact that is the structure of the processing of maps in the city. Commissioner Willers is right that the final map is approved by the city typically sometime later. And the developer typically has to get bonds, enter into a subdivision improvement agreement, we negotiate other documents. There's a whole host of steps that need to be taken. You know, they have to develop a final map, and that takes time. And it's not atypical for that to take 6, 7, 8, 9 months, and if not longer. And at that point, then the final map goes directly to the council for approval. Now, I'm not hearing any naysaying from David Storr, who's listening in to what I'm saying here. I'm trying to be as slow as possible so he can review the subdivision ordinance and confirm what I am saying. Because in our little closed session, both Wendy and David were saying, oh no, this is an advisory decision by the commission, and I'm saying, I'm not sure that's true. So we had a bit of an uncertain discussion about the proper procedure here.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Walters is correct. The bundled entitlements that we have will rest here except for an appeal. Your commission is aware that we've received letters from Sonesta Village's General Council, and so it was upon that basis that I mentioned when we had our discussion that this is going to go to the council. So I did err if I made the comment that this is a recommendation for an ultimate decision on a tentative map by the council. It's not a legislative act by the council.
So if there's no appeal of the commission's decision, David, the commission's decision
Then it's
on this
final.
map stands, right?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Okay, all right. That's what all right. So, any rate, little bit of a twist here in terms of our recommendation. If you are intending to deny, then we need to come back with some resolution and findings to support that. Standing here.
That would be another meeting.
That would be another meeting. I don't know what those findings might be, by the way. I have not heard anything tonight that would support a denial of this project, except for the issue of we have this general plan land use designation that's at odds with the zoning, and I don't know whether or not that gives a basis for denial of this project. I don't think it does, but I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I would like to get some clarification on that very specific issue, because I've done a review of the general plan map while we've been speaking tonight. I've looked at the zoning map. I've also looked at the diagram that's in the housing element, and nowhere do I see a designation, a district, anything that relates to HO or an RO. The only place I've seen it discussed is in the housing element, and it said it's in furtherance of the designation of the general plan, which I don't see as being an RO. So I would like to see get some help and guidance, and maybe even if you're of a mind to approve the project tonight, that we go back and do some research to figure out how or if this land was ever designated, zoned, or has some other entitlement that says that it's an RO zone, because I don't believe it is as I look at it tonight.
Okay, we've got a comment from Commissioner O'Neill.
I'm wondering if we can use 1926-10, Section B, desired future. The general objective for this area is to ensure that new infill developments respect their immediate context. Single-family areas should remain single-family with regular setbacks and development, and multifamily areas, while having greater flexibility in site design and massing, should clearly respond to conditions on adjacent parcels.
Commissioner O'Neill, would you cite the section number again? I've got the code section in front of me.
1926.
26.
10, Section B.
That's 010.
Yeah, 010.
Mr. Willers, do you have something?
I just want to make a comment related to the housing opportunity site and the housing element. I was on the planning commission. In fact, I was the chair when we approved the housing element, and so it's one of the reasons why I find this a disturbing instrument. The housing element under residential opportunity sites basically states that our 2020 general plan identified properties as housing opportunity properties. We developed in our zoning code and housing opportunity district to further the housing opportunity designation in the general plan. At the time we adopted that district, the housing opportunity district was given a density of 15 units to the acre, and I believe to a maximum of 25 units to the acre, and sites were identified as a way of accommodating a growing or identifying and enlarging a capacity for additional housing units. Some of those sites, some of those housing opportunity sites were developed, and so in the 2015-2023 housing element, we identified additional housing opportunity sites to receive the RO designation. Those sites are in this diagram in color as those additional sites.
What document?
This is in the housing element under housing resources with as the diagram that follows the table of listed additional sites. And what's interesting to me is that this property in our GIS system is designated as having a zoning of housing opportunity. What's also interesting is that the Mockingbird property was also designated as housing opportunity. And yet it was developed at the Sonoma residential density of 3 to 8 units to the acre. So that's why I'm frustrated. We have a zoning code, we have a housing element, we have a general plan that essentially designates land for housing development in our community. We try to do all the things to meet our RENA numbers. We now have state law that puts our feet to the fire, and yet we're being offered projects that don't comply. And I truly believe that medium density residential land is set aside for multifamily residential development, and that single family development on multifamily residential developed parcels does not comply with our development code. And so for me, that in and of itself is a grounds for not approving this project. I don't feel compelled to approve this project as a single family residential project. I think, and just to further this, housing opportunity, the RO district, which is residential housing opportunity as a designation or as a district, that 15 units to the acre, when you divide that onto this property, is 23 units. Those 23 units onto this property in the FAR produce a maximum unit size of essentially 1,400 square feet. That shows the thinking in the general plan, in the housing element, and in the development code for trying to get what we're trying to get in terms of a mix of housing in our community. If we ignore that, that's what we're doing. We're ignoring it.
Mr. Chair, if I can. Mr. Chair, this is David again. Wendy, can I share, could you allow me to share the screen, please? Is that something I can do?
Yes, you should be able to do that.
Okay, great. I'm going to do that. So I can't speak to what Commissioner Willis said about the intent. I wasn't here at the time. But when it comes to the administration, we have to look at the documents that are before us. And here you can see that the site that Commissioner Willis was talking about, this is the subject site. You also see Mockingbird. This is the diagram that Commissioner Willis was talking about. But when we as a staff look at the table that is there, you'll see that it's medium density residential. When you see the, I'm probably not doing this thing justice here as far as showing it to you, but this is in the west. It will be the page before this, so let me see if I can get that there. Here you can see middle of the table there, the 19910 5th Street West. It's showing medium density residential, and it's saying it's an underutilized. So there has clearly been a failure if the intent was to get these housing opportunity sites as designated, as shown here on the current general plan designation and the current zoning. This is what we're telling the world, the development world, this is what we want to see, this is what we see. But the translation of, even if you go to the zoning code and look at the planning areas that are for the central west planning area, it also shows this property as medium density residential, as does the zoning map of the city showing it as medium density residential. And it's within those parameters that the applicant has filed this application. So I'm not being an apologist for the application. I'm saying there was a failure between the policy document of the housing element, which came in and around after the time that the zoning code was done. If you recall, the housing elements are updated every 5 years. So this is the current housing element that we speak of today. And it has not translated well to the zoning code or the zoning map to say those things that Commissioner Willis has been speaking about tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Mr. Waltner, I guess my basic question is, we're looking at visual and written presentation of city policies and aspirations. Which form of it carries the ball. I mean, are we saying that a simple table outweighs the written description of the aspiration of the community? I mean, which one is the governing document?
Well, the only indication that that aspirational purpose statement applies to this property is shown in the map, right? The color the
Well, except it's in written form in the housing element. It states it in plain English what this designation means
But it
and is
doesn't-
supposed to produce.
But in text, it doesn't say, this designation, by the way, applies to the Fifth Street, MacArthur Avenue corner property. It doesn't say that. Just, this is what RO means. All right? Or OR, whatever it is.
Yes.
It means, that's what it means. And you have to then figure out which properties it applies to. And now we have a conflict. We have a conflict in the very document that created this designation.
And that's why my question is, which
Controls.
controls it?
I don't know. We got a map, and then we have text. The text is very, very clear. The text
Well-
signals this property and says it's medium residential. That's what the text says. So I don't know. I think there may be some law on whether maps or text prevail.
And that's what I'm asking.
I think I've seen that discussion, but it's not fresh in my mind. So that would need to be researched.
Okay, well,
And even if we find that the map in the housing element controls the housing element, we know that the zoning code wasn't changed. And that's another layer of disconnect. And so is the developer then charged with knowledge of this disconnect? Is the developer the one who's supposed to be responsible for these discrepancies in the city's planning documents? That's another question.
well, and that is a question. I mean, in other words,
They've been acting in good faith,
well,
right?
well, it depends on which document they've considered as the governing document, from which they've taken the inferences as to what they're allowed to do. But by the same token, if, for example, Mr. Willers is able to ferret out a discrepancy in the documents, he's done a level of due diligence as a member of this planning commission, which is admirable. Is that something that staff's responsible to do? Is it something that the applicant's responsible to do? Is it something that the planning commission is responsible to do? In other words, that act of due diligence falls on whose shoulders?
We are where we are. And, trying to figure out who should have done what back in August of 2021, almost a year ago, that may not be a productive discussion or examination. We are where we are right now. And this developer has been led to believe that this medium residential density designation for this site is the appropriate designation.
Okay, Mr. Barbos?
I have an observation. There seems to be some uncertainty on the legal standpoint. Sheila has brought up another basis for this. Why don't we deny this project on the basis of the 2 points raised by Bill and Sheila? We don't blow a meeting in the 5-meeting rule. Mr. Walter can research which controls. By the time it hits the city council, that issue will have been resolved. I think sitting here, that is what makes sense to me.
Well, you can make that as a motion if you would like, and then there can be discussion of the motion.
Okay. I move that we deny approval of this project on the basis it's inconsistent with the RO zoning that should be applied to this property based on the housing opportunity map, and that it's also inconsistent with section 19.26.010 subdivision B.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I just want to make a comment.
We have to have
do
a
that.
second before we discuss it.
I'll second that.
Okay? We have a motion and a second, and now we can have conversation.
I think it should include the the language, and I probably will not support your motion, but I think it also should include the language that it's not compliant with the RM zoning district language in terms of requiring multifamily housing.
Okay, I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
And the second will accept that?
Yes.
All right. Is there any further commentary on this? Questions?
I do have a comment. I do know that there are several commissioners that were present at that study session. I do believe we made comments on this development over a year ago. We did, I believe, we generally supported the project with some modifications, and now here we are, a year later, crafting motions to deny the project. So I'm kind of ambivalent. And I want to say that I don't think we can make findings to deny this project without objective standards. Our city, our zoning, our general plan does not outlaw single-family homes. It doesn't say that you have to have a house under 800 square feet. It doesn't have those objective standards that we as a community probably should be including in our zone code and our general plan and our performance standards as we move forward. But I can't see denying this project based on a glitch. If I were a planner working for the city, I would also be looking at the tables. I would be looking at the zoning code. There's many instances where the zoning is inconsistent with the general plan and possibly inconsistent with the housing element, but it's the city's responsibility to make sure that both are consistent. So I'm very ambivalent to just deny this project. The only way I would deny this project is the understanding that it reduces the number of public hearing meetings, because we have 5, and that we would then let our city council make these decisions for us. But I do believe it's our responsibility as a planning commission to make these decisions for our city council and not throw these things at them. And so we also have a responsibility to look at the design review obligations that our commission is held to, the height, the colors. There's a lot of issues that were discussed that our commission does have purview over, and we do have the ability to make changes and change the conditions of approval. So I've been hearing a lot of talk about that we should have had the housing element consistent with our zoning code and other aspects of our general plan, but that's just not the case. And I'm just trying to be a realistic person. I'm trying to look objectively at the developer that has come before the city in earnest to put together a proposal and to modify it and to meet with the community, and then to go forward with something that I still believe is consistent generally with our general plan. We cannot force a developer to put higher density housing on a project when we have such ambivalence between our zoning code and our housing element. So I'm just telling you that I don't necessarily support denying this project, only if my commission can convince me that it's strategic in the sense that we're limiting the number of meetings so we are not tying our hands further on down the road.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to ask Mr. Willers as to what your reason was for saying that you didn't think you could support this motion.
Well, I think the city council or city attorney made that argument, and that is that I think it will make the record stronger for staff to bring back findings for denial of this project. And I don't think that we should deny it today, even if it were to give the city council an additional meeting. They'll have 2 anyway. If we deny it, it'll be appealed. If we approve it, it'll be appealed, and they'll have 2 meetings to deal with it.
Well, I may have misunderstood Mr. Walter, but if we had a motion for denial and it passed, it would still require an additional meeting to bring back the findings that pertain to that denial. Do I understand that correctly, Mr. Walter?
If you direct us to do that, we will.
but the motion wasn't that.
Okay, so if the motion doesn't include a direction for the staff to come back with language supporting the denial, then that process wouldn't happen.
Correct.
And that, I assume, is your concern, Mr.
I'd
Willers.
like the opportunity to review the findings for denial.
Okay, but that, so if the motion incorporated the inclusion of
In other words,
bringing back denial and instructing staff to come back with findings that would then be acted upon at a subsequent meeting to support that denial, that you would support?
continuing this meeting to a date that staff would bring back the conditions of approval for a denial.
But
Or, I mean, the
can we
conditions for a
instruct staff to commit to findings supporting a denial without taking a action on a motion to deny?
No, you can take an action to deny, instructing staff to come back with findings to memorialize that decision.
Okay. Mr. Barbos, do you want to amend your motion?
It sounds like the amendment would be that we direct staff to come back with finding to support the denial based on the grounds we mentioned.
That's correct.
Okay, so amended.
Does the second accept that amendment?
Accepted.
Okay. All right. Is there anything further? If not, I'll have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
No.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay. Thank you all for your indulgence. This was a complex issue with a lot of surprises tonight that I think none of us had necessarily anticipated, but I appreciate your willingness to sit through it, and maybe we all learned a little something here. All right, thank you very much. We're now going to move on to our final agenda item, and as soon as I open my we're now moving back to item 7.1, which is a discussion on a recommendation to the City Council on the introduction of an ordinance dealing with special use standards for tents. And these are seasonal tents and pertains to both the design and the use during the rainy season citywide. Staff, can we get your staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Barnett and Planning Commissioners. Christina Tierney, Associate Planner, has taken the lead to work on these regulations, and she's asked me to tell you that the City Council Subcommittee, including Vice Chair Barnett, Council Member Felder, have been working on these.
Vice Mayor Barnett. I think you said Vice Chair Barnett.
Confusing.
Yes, there's two Barnetts, but I'm not on the committee.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. I also know that Commissioner Willers has given some input on this ordinance. Ultimately, the staff's recommendation tonight is to have this commission make a recommendation to the City Council to adopt the ordinance. But we're here tonight to address any issues and answer any questions. So thank you.
I've got a question. This does not, I expect, pertain to tents on public property, such as the parklet spaces that are on the street.
Correct.
So this is only tents on private property, which would be in the rear or side yards of a business location.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have just one question about the ordinance. It has to do with the size of tents. We were talking about the height setbacks and how the materials of the tents, but we don't really have like an objective standard like maximizing or limiting the size of the tent. So say, for example, you have a 10,000 square foot lot, can you put a 10,000 square foot tent on it? I think that we should really look at that. Also, the other thing that like personally offends me is covering landscaping and very large heritage trees with tents. And so I'm questioning whether or not we should be looking at that as well. So those are my questions.
Thank you.
Yes. Please, Commissioner O'Neill.
I'm wondering why we're bothering with stating that tents shall be white or off-white in color or clear. Why can't we give more flexibility to that?
Okay, any other comments on this item? Questions, I mean? At this point, I'd like to invite our representative of the fire department to come up. Thank you for your indulgence and your patience tonight.
Not a problem, thank you. Trevor Smith, Fire Marshal, Sonoma Valley Fire. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm here to answer questions that you have. I'd also like to say that it's my mandate for the City of Sonoma residents and the fire district that Sonoma Valley Fire District serves to ensure the life and safety of our residents. And we do that one way by enforcing the standards of the building code, inclusive of the fire code. The planning department asked us to work collaboratively with them on the development of this ordinance to ensure compliance with those standards. And it is our opinion that they do meet those standards. So if you have any additional questions.
I do have one question for you.
Yes.
Having from time to time, on occasion, eaten inside one of these tents on the back of a restaurant property, I've noted that despite the language in this ordinance that says all interior materials such as tables and chairs and so forth must be kept a minimum of 3 feet distance from the side of the tent, I can report to you that it is not happening that way currently. And that, in fact, if I sat in the chair that I was in, my back was right up against the tent. This really pertains to the issue of enforcement and inspection. And so, do you know if attendant to this ordinance and the provision of these rules, that the city is going to undertake a regular inspection routine to ensure compliance? Because if we're not going to secure compliance and enforcement of the rules, then of course the rules mean nothing. So do you have had any discussion with the city about how this compliance issue will be monitored?
I haven't had a direct conversation. I can speak to the issues as related to the fire code. When these tents are permitted by my office, they require an inspection to ensure compliance.
Yeah.
Additionally, members of my organization do spot visits to ensure compliance with those things. Often the most regulated items inside of tents from the fire code's perspective is heating elements and food warming and other items that could cause exposure to the tent material.
Yeah. Well, I have noticed as well that this ordinance pertains to the disallowance of gas-fed heaters inside a tent. But that's happening right now.
That is correct. The fire code does not allow for that. However, as a county-wide amendment or alternate means to ensure compliance with the COVID standards and mandates and to provide for operational success of our businesses amidst all of these conditions, allowances were made to allow for propane heaters to be utilized in and around tents under certain guidelines of clearance and ventilation, and we're working together now with our fire prevention inspectors to ensure that that's no longer occurring. And multiple entities within the city have been issued notices of violation to cease and desist that.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you. I guess, my overarching concern is that it's relatively easy to come up with regulations, and it's relatively difficult to enforce them because the staff time and the effort that has to be made for people to get onto a schedule of regularly inspecting places, and obviously it can't be done with pre-notice. You can't say, I'm coming out to make sure everything's in compliance in your tent, and all of a sudden they move the tables and chairs to be 3 feet away from the side of the tent because they know someone from your department is coming. Doesn't work.
Correct.
So it's got to be an informal spot type check, but I don't know if there's the budget for it. I don't know if there's the training for it. I don't know if there's the room in the activity of your department to be able to add something like that to your daily routines, and that's what it'll take.
I would agree with that. Many of the conditions of the ordinance being proposed are not regulated by the fire code, so we wouldn't have a mandate to enforce or inspect those.
Mhm.
The specific items my office would check would be only the conditions regulated by the fire code.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your comments. Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions or comments at this time? Well, I will say that the issue of the color of the tents was something that I raised with Christina. I did not get a response back. I'm not sure what the underlying reason is. It may be that this kind of temporary seasonal tent isn't made in any other colors, and that may make the issue moot. But I really didn't understand why we were mandating a specific color, and so I wouldn't have any problem striking the color requirement from a tent. On the other hand, I'm not sure I'd be thrilled with a pink tent. But that may just be my
What do you
taste,
have
and I
against
like pink. I like pink. I'm wearing pink, baby. So that's my only comment, and I'm not hard and fast on it. Mr. Barbaros.
I'd like to ask Commissioner McDonald to clarify a little bit his objection to covering landscape, and how would you modify this to address that?
Well, the way I look at, just generally speaking, the use of indoor-outdoor spaces, looking at outdoor spaces, and us approving by use the seating and whatnot of outdoor areas, as you assume that you have outdoor seating and it rains, then you don't use that area. And we have, over the past 10 years or more, probably like 10 years, I think I started seeing these tents pop up, where the city's, been slowly allowing these to happen. I personally think that if there's a big, gigantic tree in your front yard, that maybe you shouldn't be putting a tent there, because, you're compromising the integrity of the tree. You're trying to make something of something that's not. And so I kind of want to discourage that when that instance does come up. And also the size of tents, like I brought that up. So how much tent are we going to allow? I mean, where are we going to draw the line? And we were just discussing about a minimum and a maximum size of a house. Well, here we are putting ourselves in the same situation. We're not saying that there's a minimum or a maximum size. So maybe since we're creating a legislation and an ordinance, we should be thinking about that. So I mean, my feeling is that if you have a beautiful landscaped front area that attracts people to sit outside in a beautiful garden setting, and it then becomes rainy season, well, maybe you should, think about whether or not you want to cover all that up with a tent, because you're kind of, playing with the integrity of the streetscape. So I, personally don't think that we should be encouraging that. So I can give you a very specific instance where I think it doesn't make sense, but I don't want to call out a particular business for something that they do. So But I think we all know that. And I don't think that that's really what we want to encourage in Sonoma. So that's where I'm going. And also, I really think we need to limit the size of the tents. I don't think that, I mean, is Hop Monk, for example, is that size tent, is that acceptable? I've heard our commission numerous times saying, that is way too big. Well, here's the opportunity. What is way too big? So I want us to think about these things, you know. I mean, here we are, you know, we've just had a discussion about our inability to create legislation that gives guidance to people that want to do something. And here we have the opportunity to actually be very clear and very specific with objective standards. This is, to me, a no-brainer. This is a super easy thing to do. So.
All right, well, let me follow up with you on that. Oh, you're right. Thank you, Mr. Willers. At this point, see if there's any member of the public who would like to speak about seasonal tents. Past tense. Future tense. Okay. We'll bring it back to the commission. Thank you. But no.
Is this just for private, is this just for business property, or is this for residential as well?
This is for business properties for seasonal use.
Okay, so it's for commercial use only?
Yes.
So residences along streetways cannot put up a tent in their front yard?
No, and this doesn't allow front yard tents even for businesses.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Mr. Willers?
Okay, so I support actually everything that Commissioner McDonald said. I think that covering landscaping with these tents in the middle of the rainy season is taking water away from landscaping when it's most valuable during the growing season. In other words, it's reserving all that water in its roots so that come spring it can grow, and you're depriving it from doing that by covering it. Secondly, I do think that we should limit the size of tents. It's interesting that this ordinance doesn't allow front tents. However, the business that Hop Monk is a corner property. It essentially has two fronts. And the one front is Broadway and the other front is Andrew. And Andrew is pretty significantly impacted by the size of that tent. And so maybe some limitation on, you know, I understand a business's desire to have a tent in inclement weather and maintain some of its outdoor seating so that it has a larger reserve of seating during the winter. But at the same time, if Hop Monk was limited to its deck space for its tent, maybe that's a happy compromise so that the tent doesn't extend all the way to the street and have to be essentially taller, almost as tall as the building in its scale. And then lastly, the same property now is installing, for lack of a better word, sunscreens that are very high in the sky because they've taken their temporary tent down. And so I'm just wondering where those came from and if they were allowed or permitted or requested. So that's the newest change in the hood, in my hood. Anyway, so, you know, I think these are valid things to consider, and the idea of getting this ordinance objective, not subjective, is valuable for all of us.
I want to echo the comments of Commissioner Willers. I noticed the sales sunscreen things going up at Hop Monk today, and I'm wondering if that is regulated or if it becomes part of our tent dialogue. And I have no idea, but they're beautiful, but they're large. So I would definitely want to question how that gets included.
Others? Well, let me add my 2 cents. I think that we've opened up a sticky wicket here, and we're going to have more discussion about this, particularly when Associate Planner Tierney is with us, and we can have a dialogue about some of these questions. For example, if we want to limit the size of a tent, is that going to be a function of a percentage of the available space, or is it going to be an absolute dimension? In other words, we've got to explore the ramifications of different ways of limiting what the dimensions or size of a tent might be. I don't know what those are tonight. Insofar as distinctions such as covering entire trees during the rainy season as something that would be disallowed for a tent would have to be looked at in the language of whatever revision to this ordinance we might want to make. And then this whole issue of other kinds of displayed or deployed appurtenances, such as sunscreens, and whether or not they're qualified. In other words, I'm not sure if this currently has a definition of a tent in it, but we may have to look at what a tent definition is to be broader, to encompass more kinds of structures than just something that we think of traditionally as a tent. So I'm going to suggest we continue this item until we have the opportunity to think more about these questions, have staff look into them, and then go on and make a recommendation to the City Council. So if the others concur with me, I would entertain a motion for a continuance of this item.
I do have one comment, just something to throw out for Christina to think about is, we do have kind of like a formula where we look at coverage in our residential and our commercial districts. So something to consider is like, say, for example, you can't cover more than 50% of the rear yard or a maximum of 5,000 square feet or whatever. So along those lines, those are things that might make it easy to implement. But that would be up to staff to come up with that magical formula that we all think makes sense. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Can I hear a motion for a continuance?
I make a motion that we continue this to a date uncertain.
Hey, do I have a second?
That would be correct.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Yes.
Commissioner Willers?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Barnett?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
All right, this brings us up to whether or not there are items for discussion. David, did you have anything that you wanted to bring up at this time?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two things. A reminder that we continued your special meeting, I think it was April 28th, I could be wrong on the date there. That was continued to Thursday, May the 19th to discuss the solitary matter of the residential component. I haven't had a chance to talk with legal counsel about the production of that packet yet, so I'm gonna guess that ordinarily that would be produced on a Friday, but we do have the ability to wrap over to a Monday. So I'll need to talk with Mr. Walter about the staff report for that and its preparation. Second item of the two tonight, I wanted to mention, and that is that on the May 18th City Council agenda, there will be the ordinances with respect to the creation of a Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Committee, and also the Climate Action Committee. So should the commission be interested in that, they could watch that meeting or even attend. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Storer, and safe travels.
Thank you.
Okay, and any comments from the commissioners? Mr. Willers.
I personally now, especially with the limitation of meetings under SB 330 and the new housing laws, I feel that it's really important for the Planning Commission to get the first review of a project. And I understand when projects include a historic ability in terms of a demolition, that it needs to go in front of the Design Review Committee. But I think that the process as it is currently put together, where the Design Review Committee, who's reviewing colors and materials essentially, is tacitly recommending approval to the Planning Commission of a project which the Planning Commission hasn't even evaluated relative to the zoning ordinance. And I think there's a problem with that. Applicants get further along in the process. They've spent more time to get the Design Review Commission approval. And the Planning Commission is already behind the ball, one meeting. And so unless there's I think especially on projects that use the new housing laws as their processing, SB 35, SB 330, blah, 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 SB 9 coming, if any of them ever come, that their first directive is to us rather than the DRCHP. And it will make for a more efficient process. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Willers. Mr. Barbos?
Especially in light of the 5-meeting rule. I mean, there is really no point in burning a meeting on design review if you don't even know where you're going with the project.
Thank you.
And that goes for applicants as well as staff as well as the commission.
Any other comments from the, oh yes, Mr. Walter?
One thing that we've given thought to here in Sonoma and the other cities we represent, although Sonoma's been doing this to some degree, in fact it's memorialized in the ordinance, is you have these meetings before the application is actually deemed complete. Because SB 330 says that you start counting meetings once the application's been deemed complete. In the past, I've discouraged these, I call them sneak peeks, because we've had issues here in Sonoma with some commissioners taking it upon themselves to draft plans and submit architectural designs and tell people what they think the plan and the project should really look like. And later on, when the project gets denied, the lawyers say that that particular commissioner was biased, had already formulated his judgment on the case. So we need to be careful about that. We don't want you to be prejudging the project before the application's even been submitted and deemed complete. But I think given the landscape that we're in now, that risk is really relatively minimal. And having as many meetings as we can before the applications are submitted is a good idea.
I'm assuming that a decision like this actually is a council policy decision, not a planning commission decision.
Well, it's interesting. I'll confer with David. I think our municipal code actually contemplates these pre-submittal reviews. I'll take a closer look at it, and if so, then we may already have a basis to have that process kicked into high gear.
Mr. Chair, David here. To add on to what Jeff has just said, your planning commission adopted a policy regarding study sessions where you highly encourage applicants to submit an application. And in the case of the last 2 projects with Denova and others, we've had study sessions where guidance has been given before they submit. But as Jeff just said, we now have SB 330, which allows an applicant to submit an application, a pre-application, if you will, and then they've got 180 days to submit the formal application. So in the case of Denova's project that we just looked at Hummingbird, that's exactly what happened. We had a study session, then they submitted the pre-app. That study session did not count toward the 5. It was only after we deemed it complete that Jeff was talking about. So we can certainly have a planning commission policy, I think, and maybe Jeff and I can work on that.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to have too much discussion about this, but I appreciate all the comments. Any other comments from the commission?
Oh, I just have one. I'm going to be missing the June 16th Planning Commission meeting. I had planned a vacation before we changed the meeting date, so I apologize.
No apology necessary, but we'll miss you. All right. no further business, I would hear a motion for adjournment.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, without objection, the motion passes.